Polish and Purple back with another crazy week.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So, I mean, we were sort of chatting a little bit before we started the recording, and like you're saying, there was so much going on, and I think there's some really interesting things. Again, the Supreme Court decisions and some of the trials and stuff, I think, are really interesting. But
Yep.
I mean, there's just no getting around the whole assassination thing. So, I mean, it's just
Right.
you have to address the 500-pound gorilla. So, I guess that's what we're going to be doing.
Yeah, well, it's going to be interesting as they start to investigate this. It is mind-boggling that that kid was able to get up on that roof and all of that. I know, really, none of that really has anything to do with It shouldn't have anything really to do with politics. We're dealing with a crazy person, basically.
Yeah.
Anybody that would go about doing that, whether you agree with Trump or don't agree with Trump, it's just not a healthy mental thing to be even thinking about, right? So
Completely unacceptable.
no, so it's on one hand, I was really encouraged, that I was really hoping that from that people really would do what everybody said in the initial hours. Was, hey, let's tamper down the language and all that. And there's been a little bit of that.
Yeah.
But and then on top of that, with Biden and all his troubles and getting COVID now and all that, it's
I
like,
can't believe they came down. That's like,
really? I mean, geez. So he's definitely doing the 1 step, 2 steps back kind of scenario right now. And, so it's just like, but I have a feeling and I haven't listened much to the Republican National Convention. I listened a little bit to Vance I listened to pretty much all of Vance last night. I just wanted to hear what he had to say. And I think he was pretty, he wasn't too inflammatory. There was a lot of things that was just like, okay, well, that's just blatantly false statement you just made. But other than that, it wasn't inflammatory. And they all do that, so it's like, I just kind of take that as, okay, both sides just like whatever suits their fancy.
Yeah.
But I haven't watched the rest of it. I mean, I've heard hints of things where people are just kind of going back at it again.
Yeah.
And that, the Democrats have to keep saying that, we got this existential threat and, all these kinds of things. It's like, well, it definitely goes both ways. And I'm afraid it's going to be a very short-lived detente.
Yeah.
In terms of the language.
Well, that was sort of the thing that I was going to get to too. The first of all is we have no idea what the shooter's motivation was. No one's come out with that. There's no kind of manifesto. There's nothing of those things. So anything that you would say about why he did what he did would be entirely speculation.
Yep.
So again, I don't know the answer to that, but I did want to hit the rhetoric thing because I think there's a few really important sort of points about it. That are worth talking about that maybe I don't think get talked about enough. So first of all, vitriol in politics, where people are going to go at each other, well, that's part and parcel to politics. That's going to happen. You can't come out and say, okay, now we all just have to be nicey nice and not complain, about each other's politics. So, for instance, you have one side calls the other side fascist, and the other side calls the other side communist. But I mean, that's far right, far left ideology, at least in the traditional sense of right and left.
Right. Yep.
I'm not too happy about that.
Yeah.
But, so I mean, some of that stuff is, you're going to have to just deal with it. It's big boy time. You put on your big boy pants, you go out, or big girl pants. Let's be fair for now.
Right. Yep.
And, you're going to have to deal with the slings and arrows. But I think that Trump is sort of unique in a certain way that the lying about Trump, I think, is more like actual lying and less like hyperbole and demonization.
Oh yeah.
Like it's almost like I'm almost okay with demonization. If you want to call Trump a fascist,
right? Oh yeah.
Well, okay, you're pointing out that his particular ideology might have some resemblance to fascism, which is a political ideology. Okay, right. But when they get more specific and they're like, he's a Nazi. He's associated with white supremacy. He's a Russian spy. All these different things. It's like, wait, now you're stating specific things. And the point that I wanted to make on the show today was that Trump's been around for 50 years, right? In the public eye, he was a tabloid darling. He was a celebrity on TV for years. He's been vetted over and over again in a million different ways for 50 years. And even when he ran for president the first time, generally speaking, the critiques of him was, he's a sleazy businessman. He's, he engages in unfair wage practices and labor practices. He can be dishonest and blah, blah, blah. But then somewhere along the line, after he won, it was, he's a Russian plant. He's an actual Nazi. He thinks that white supremacy is an okay thing. For the 50 years that he was a businessman in New York, nobody was saying, oh my God, look at what Trump was hosting a Klan rally. Trump funded, this white supremacist organization. He was a donator to the Clintons, right?
Right.
So those things, the actual lies are the things that I think we need to start being, more straightforward with and say, look, that's just a lie. And the other thing that I wanted to get to about the whole lying thing is one of the biggest liars in this whole Trump circus is Adam Schiff, who is soon going to be the senator from California. And he went on TV shows for years claiming that he had evidence of Donald Trump's collusion and crimes, involving election rigging with Putin. And he said, because I'm on the intelligence committee, because I have access to certain information, I know that these things are happening and you're going to see the evidence come out soon. And he went and he did that for 3 years, lied directly to everybody's face, provable lies, because the Mueller report came out. He was censored in Congress for these things. If he had evidence that Trump was actually working with Putin, he would have produced it by now. So we know that he was actually literally lying. And now we're going to make him a senator. That type of thing in the politics that we have now, that's where I think the real problem is. It's one thing to call your opponent a communist because you think that they have that particular philosophy. But when they're a Nazi, they're colluding with white supremacists, and they're an existential threat to the country, and mixed in with that are a whole bunch of actual lies, I think that's a real problem.
Yeah, and I guess the challenge of it is as the old saying goes, you're a product of the company you keep, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he's definitely kind of convorted with various individuals over time, the David Dukes of the world and stuff.
About that, because that's a legitimate criticism.
Absolutely.
One of my biggest criticisms of Trump when he got to be president was he surrounded himself with people who were just awful. Yes. He made awful decisions in his appointments, and that backed up on him and caused him a lot of grief. He ended up having to fire people and rehire. It seemed like for a while there was no cabinet position he didn't have to fill at least 2 or 3 times. So again, I mean,
those are facts, right?
There's absolutely legitimate reasons to criticize Trump. I'm not a defender of Trump. I'm not a fan of Trump. I'm not a Republican.
Right.
But it's like it can't be these stupid lies. I mean, basically, we know who Trump is. And if you want to say Trump's a bastard and he's dishonest, I think there are plenty of reasons that you could back that up. But when you say he's actually a Nazi and is trying to, create a racially segregated, country, or when they put up the things about how, the Christian right, all the Handmaid's Tale images that they post about how Trump is somehow going to bring the Christian ideology and, force all women to be sex slaves. Trump's not even religious. He was never some religious conservative type when he was in New York. We have 50 years to know that he's about as irreligious a person as you can possibly find. And if you wanted to criticize him, you should criticize him saying, hey, he compromised his beliefs by suddenly taking on the religious aspects of the Republican Party when he wanted to be president. You want to make that complaint? Absolutely. But
Absolutely.
the idea that he wants to bring forth some sort of hardcore Christian theocracy, that's crazy.
No. Well, he wouldn't even know how to do that. Right? But I think the concern is, and I think it is a legitimate concern, although I don't think it necessarily has to be brought up in the political discourse, because to your point, there's so much other stuff you could talk about that you really don't need to do that. But because he has aligned himself, or at least had conversations with people who probably are closer to thinking about those sorts of things, that
Mhm.
don't believe, we need to eliminate contraception and abortion and IVF and all this kind of stuff, who have come out and actually stated that.
Yeah.
And he supports those people. That's where it gets the fuzzy part. But I agree with you. There's so much else to talk about that is tangible, that it doesn't rely on, he's related to this person who knows that person kind of thing, to get to those extrapolations of, hey, he really is a closet Hitler kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, you don't even have to go there.
Yeah.
You just don't have to go there. And, on the flip side of it, we kind of had this conversation right when the whole Trump assassination thing happened. We happened to be over at a little party with some neighbors, and there was one particular person who was going on and on about similar kinds of connections Biden has,
Oh yeah.
that he's the most corrupt person. And, what about this, his connection to this person, all that. It's like, these things all might be true, but until you actually, bring that into facts, into a factual level, it's like hearsay,
Yeah.
and what we need now is clarification on everything,
Right. Yep.
and there's so much when it comes to Trump that you can talk about that he has actually done. The one that does, it'll be interesting to see of all the legal issues that he's had.
Mm-hmm.
And then we probably should get off Trump, because none of us are going to do anything about Trump or any of these guys.
Yeah, we're not going to.
But I feel you, as far as you just kind of have to get it off your chest a little bit.
Yeah.
Of all the legal issues that he faces, the one that just still blows me, most of them I don't even really care about. The documents case, yeah. Every president that's left office has taken some issue, and now the complaint was he took a whole bunch and then didn't want to give it back, right?
Right.
But put that one to the side. Certainly New York you can put to side. The only one that really is always been interesting to me is the Georgia one, only because they got him on a phone call saying, I need to find 11,000, whatever it was,
Right.
12,000 votes, right? And they literally recorded. And now you can say, well, he wasn't literally meaning to go drum up that. He was just, whatever. Yeah. But that one was the most clear. But then what they did, the prosecutor there, they went so far beyond. If they would have just focused on, he tried to influence this one election through this action, but not tried to build this big, huge conspiracy thing, which in the best of worlds is almost impossible to win.
Yeah.
But I think you could have got him on a state charge of, you tried to steal votes.
Yeah.
Because we have a recording where you asked for that. Right?
And that's the thing, if the problem with the problem that I have with the Georgia case, and which I think a lot of people have with the Georgia case at this point, is that because it basically got circumvented by the corruption that the prosecutor was involved in, whatever facts there were to be learned from that case,
I know,
never came out. So it's like
it just become mud.
Right. I know that it's sort of too. It's like you get certain parts of the story. It's like Trump made a phone call to the governor and said, find me 11,000 votes or whatever the quote was. It was something along those lines.
Yeah.
But you don't know any of the context of what else was going on there, or what they were saying, or if there was anything more to it, or if there was anything more to the conversation.
Well, they did release the whole recording. I mean, it was pretty clear, at least when I listened to the whole thing, that, hey,
but that's the thing. When
you got to figure something out.
When you actually have to submit it into court and both sides get a chance to argue over it, that's when you start to be able to find some more clarity with it. So it's like there may have been some there in that case, but it was never really vetted. So it's that one, to me, is like, I don't know what to say about it. I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible there wasn't wrongdoing done, because if there'd been a trial, maybe that all the wrongdoing would have come out and been provable, and we would have seen it. But unfortunately, at this point, there's not really much to say about it.
Yeah, no, I know. And I mean, the whole thing, and, everybody kind of has criticized all the lawyers that Trump has gone through, which is kind of funny. in a way. But at the same time, the flip side of that is, hey, he's gotten where he wanted to be in the whole legal system. He's delayed everything. They've
Yep.
done a masterful job. Whether you agree with it or not, they've done a masterful job, whether they intended to or not, I don't know. But to get him where he needed to be to
Yeah.
survive the election season.
But, you know,
So, yeah.
there's also the flip side to that, which is if you look at other trials, like big trials that have gone on in the past, they usually take years.
Oh, absolutely.
Years and years and years
Absolutely.
to get. I can't remember how many documents they were saying was in the actual document case. They were saying there was like 13 million different records.
Oh, they had, yeah.
And so the idea that you come together and you get all these prosecutors, to me, it's very suspicious, first of all, the whole charging thing. But all these prosecutors come together at almost exactly the same time to charge Trump with God knows how many things overall. And then they expect to get all those trials done in like 5 months. Well, that's stupid on its face.
There's no way.
That's never in a million years. So there's a lot of talk about how Trump was really clever and successful about delaying all these trials. What would have been amazing is if they'd actually gotten them in.
Yeah.
Because trials like this that are unprecedented. Because that's another one of the things that they talk about. Every time any motion is made or any argument is brought up in court before the judge or whatever, it's brand new. No one's ever seen it before. No one's ever heard it before because there's never been a president charged with things. There's all kinds of mechanisms in the law that make exceptions for presidents can do this or presidents can do that, or, the whole immunity thing came down. So it's like, you're going to charge Trump in like 6 different jurisdictions all at the same time. And you're going to get all those trials done in 5 months. It's not a miracle that Trump delayed them. It's a miracle they got even one of them done.
Right. Yeah, no. And again, that it goes back to his, I do give him credit in respect of he's been down these roads before. He always is good at pushing right up to the line, maybe even going over the line a little bit in some things.
Mm-hmm.
And he does it at such a frequent volume that I think it kind of just adds up and kind of caught up to him a bit. Yeah. But, there was no way they were going to handle all these things all at once. It was just ridiculous.
Yeah.
But, I guess part of that is it's probably good. At least there was a marker put down on some of these things for later reference. Because out of all, it is kind of, again, going back to old slogans, right? Where there's smoke, there's fire. There's so much.
Right.
Now, I don't think anybody should even worry about any of those legal cases at this point from a political standpoint. It's like, again, go after him for things that are factual,
Right.
And so he did appoint Supreme Court, and maybe we can get to the Supreme Court now, Supreme Court justices that delivered on what they said they wouldn't do, right? And turn over Roe versus Wade. And so, but that's a legitimate policy discussion. It's not that it's necessarily right or wrong. It's just it's a debate.
Yeah.
And that's fair. And you should go after them for that.
Right. I think that's perfectly.
And they are.
Yeah. And right. And so that's going to be a big issue in the election and rightly so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the other part of the whole Trump thing is the vast majority of people are so tuned out to a lot of this stuff. It's, there's just a lot of wind blowing around, but it's really not affecting most people.
No.
I mean, and then you combine that with the fact that, in a good year, maybe we have 60% of the voting public actually voting.
Yeah.
Which means 40% are just totally tuned out.
Yeah.
And those are the bigger issues that I think we got to figure out. And hopefully, again, a third party could help figure out how do you get people engaged? Because I think we've talked before. I think so much of whether it's Trump or Biden or whoever, I think so many people are looking to these people as superhumans that they're going to solve all their problems for them.
Yeah.
And it's not good. It doesn't work that way. but they find, and I always get in trouble when I say this, but it reminds me very much of a lot of religions. People think, okay, whoever my God is, they're going to solve all my problems for me.
Yeah.
And it's kind of that same mentality. It's like, well, hey, let's hope for the best, but don't depend on that, man. You need to be doing what you need to do to improve your life, to all that kind of stuff. And I don't think that's really a progressive idea or a conservative idea. That's a human idea.
Yeah, I agree with that. One of the things that I've heard over the years people talk about is the idea of sort of a utopian society. If you
Right.
just do X, Y, and Z, you eventually reach this utopia. If you happen to be a religious person, then it has to do with your religion. If I'm a good Christian and I, obey all the 10 commandments and I do what I'm supposed to do, I'll eventually reach heaven, which is my utopia.
Right.
If you're an atheist or a communist, then you believe that, if I, overthrow the bourgeoisie and, take control of the means of production, eventually there'll be this perfect society where everyone is equal and balanced and everybody shares and everything.
Right.
They're both, in my opinion, complete bunk.
Yeah.
That's
just not reality.
So, but people, and myself, true, I'm not going to exclude myself from humanity on this one. If you can't hold on to some sort of positive thing, some sort of positive thought, or like the opportunity to get to someplace a little bit better,
yep,
life becomes very depressing. And there's actually been research that I've read over the years just about how the human brain has evolved. That there's always this little part of you that gives you hope, because that's what drives you to survive.
Right,
and
exactly.
even pre-technological societies, there has to be something within the human spirit, essentially, that says there's a reason for me to survive and to go on. And because that exists, it sort of leads people to say, okay, I want to create this utopian kind of like society or someplace beyond that I can get to.
Exactly.
So it's very, like you say, it's very human to want that, but it's just sort of in which direction are you sort of like, which path are you taking? So,
but I think, and again, this is where the two-party system really screws it all up. Is
exactly.
It's a black or white issue, and all these things, and it's never a black and white issue, right?
Yeah.
It's always in the middle somewhere. It's a very gray. It could be a darker gray sometimes, a lighter gray, whatever. But it's never. Most things are not that way. And again, and maybe that's what we need to. Maybe that's the point we need to hang on with the third party is, hey, these are human values. They're not Democratic values. They're not Republican values. These are human values. And most people will agree. They want the freedom to do, as long as they're not harming somebody else, they want the freedom to live their lives within, certain boundaries, that you're not screwing other people up or hurting the earth or whatever. And everybody's pretty reasonable about that. And, I guess maybe that's where the two parties have gone so far astray.
Yeah.
Where they're no longer talking about, hey, people just want to, most people I know are good people.
Yeah.
They want to they're not out to screw anybody or try and hurt things or whatever. Exactly. They just want to kind of get up in the morning, like you said, have hope that I'm going to make some kind of difference, whether it's in my life or other people's lives. We've gotten it so overcomplicated in so many ways.
But the complexity is part of the issue too, because like one of the issues that obviously comes up quite a bit is the environment, like global warming. So now all of a sudden you're looking at a global problem. Well, the complexity of solving an issue like that is vast,
unbelievable.
And for in talking about going, going one step forward and taking two steps back, for everything that you sort of like check off your list of things that you need to solve, you create two more things that then need to be solved. And one of the problems I've always had with the two-party system that I think is just completely unsolvable by two parties is that if you want to solve a really complicated problem, you're going to have to come up with a huge array of possible solutions and possible paths, because you're not wise enough to just be able to sit here and be like, oh, if we just do that, then everything will be great. It's not that simple. So you need a diversity of opinion, and you need the ability of people to come up with ideas and try things and innovate. And I'm always very big on innovation. And then when you have that, then you have a much better chance of coming up with an actual workable solution. But when you have the two parties that are
Yeah.
dedicated to opposing each other, the only thing they can do is chart divergent paths. So if the path that's correct is in the middle, there's no hope of them ever getting there because
Yep.
they are, by their very nature, set against each other. But when you start to have more parties and you start to have coalitions, then you can start to have a greater amount of ideas coming together and coming up with possible solutions. And
Yep.
coalitions are also moderating forces because it's very hard to build a coalition around something very far afield, right? Because
Yeah.
there's only a very small number of people who actually want that. Everybody else wants to sort of draw things back into sort of the reasonable, logical center of things. And so when you have more parties, you have more of an opportunity to do that. But, right now we just don't have that.
No, not at all. And it was interesting in the short time I was listening to the to Vance and the Republican convention. It was funny. Well, they had the union guy making a speech there. I don't know if you saw that. So here's the union president for, I think was it Teamsters or UAW? I
I
can't
think it
remember
was
which one.
Teamsters.
And it was like, wait a minute, there's a pro-union guy talking to a bunch of Republicans. It's like,
Yeah.
whoa, mind blowing. But it all came. But anyways, and then Vance did his thing. I listened to him a little bit. But one of the things that they keep talking about is both sides, Republicans and Democrats, that we need to bring manufacturing back and we need to protect our work. Both parties are now out for the average person and the middle class worker and all that. It's like, well, wait a minute. I mean, that's great, but this is like, you guys are literally, I said it to my wife when I was listening to Vance. It's like, you could take his speech, search and replace, and when he says GOP or Trump, and just put in Democrat and Biden.
Yeah.
And it would work just as well there because it's all about, we got to bring back workers. We got to create jobs. We got, the whole thing about the free markets. We need to rethink all that because, China's taken over the world and all this kind of stuff. It's like, well, wait a minute. This whole free market thing, that's gone on since almost the beginning of the country. The whole premise that keep government out of business and all that kind of stuff. And Reagan was a big free market advocate back in the day. But then Clinton did the NAFTA deal. Both the parties have been involved in free market, right?
Well,
and it's like, well, now we've created a culture where people want cheap stuff.
Yep, that's it.
And it's like, man, you just let the genie out of the bottle, So, and I'm not saying we can't somehow get it back in the bottle, but you now, going back to the 40% who have no clue what's going on, all they care about is cheap stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like, which is totally in opposition to let's bring it back, make it here, and still pay people great wages and all this kind of stuff. So it's just like, oh my gosh, we painted ourselves into such a corner as a country.
Yeah, no, as I said, I completely agree with your sentiment there. We've said this on earlier episodes before. Is the idea that if you want to do the things that people talk about wanting to do, bringing work back, bringing manufacturing back, making things in the USA, having free markets and all this stuff, you have to fix the U.S. economy so that cost starts to come down, because you can't do the things that you're talking about as long as everything in America costs 10 times more than it costs anywhere else. You're not going to bring workers and factories back into the United States if you can do it for 1/10 of the price in Mexico and 1/100th of the price in China. So you have to start, well, I mean, I would say that you have to start paring down government, because the cost of running the government is too high. And when the government prints money, that creates inflation, and that makes everything more expensive. And, you go down through this whole cycle. But you've got to get to a point where you have a competitive economy. And then once you have the competitive economy and you can get the cost of things down, then you can start talking about these things. But nobody wants to take that first step of saying, okay, we can't be $40 trillion in debt and think that we're going to have low price manufacturing in the United States. The two things are just locked into each other.
Well, no, the response always has been with that as well, as far as losing manufacturing and all that, was, well, we're going to be the brain trust, and we'll create the things here and we'll get them built elsewhere cheaper. And it's
Yeah.
like, well, that's assuming that other countries don't have really smart people.
Right.
Yeah, it's like, guess what? China's got some really smart people. India's got some really smart people. Russia's got some really, everybody's got really smart people.
Yeah.
And while I think we should focus more on innovation, and I agree with you on that, there's a lot of innovation going on everywhere in the world. And so
Yeah.
you do come back to your point. Well, you then need to figure out, how do we balance this out through costs? Because the one value I think we do hold dear here, maybe more so than a lot of other countries, is we do value freedom, and we, right, wrong, or indifferent. The reason why we have cheap stuff is the workers in China, basically, in
Have
many
no
cases,
rights.
they're slaves,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And we don't think that's a good thing. Most of us don't think that's a good thing, and so that's the challenge. And I don't know if innovation can dig us out of that hole. I keep thinking, well, as robotics comes along, AI comes along,
Mm.
that will sort of help level the playing field a bit. But there's just some things that are just physical jobs that aren't going away anytime soon. And, but hopefully innovation will get us out of that hole somehow. But outside of that, raising tariffs is not going to get us out of that hole.
Yeah.
Because, we're all going to end up paying the tariffs. So It's not China, as Trump likes to say.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I don't think that'll be happening.
But
we do need to dig us out of that hole.
I'm not sure you could really put a big enough tariff on enough places to really.
No.
I mean, I have to say, the thing about tariffs are, because there's always the famous things about America putting tariffs on things and having it go complete hell. It's I always try and remember the Smoot-Hawley Act, because that seems to come to mind for when it comes to tariffs. Yeah. But the idea is that because the United States is no longer a net exporter, but it is a net importer, putting tariffs on things can make sense from a revenue standpoint. But as far as like actually getting the economy to work better and bringing manufacturing back,
no,
doubtful.
No. And even if it improved the economy a little bit, it just doesn't solve the underlying infrastructure problems we have. Yeah. So that means a much larger percentage of our workers need to be, white collar type workers.
Yeah, highly competent. Yeah, all that
and
stuff.
it's just not. It's not what everybody wants to do. Mm-hmm. And that's not what they're necessarily good at. That's the one thing that, I think we have really missed on the whole emphasis on college. And I'm a big proponent on education. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But to try and force fit everybody to go to college, which is what I think that trend's sort of we're moving away from that trend now a little bit. Thank goodness. It's just a wrong thing. We've saddled so many people with debt going to college that they're never going to use.
Yeah.
And it's sad. It's really sad. So.
Yeah. The economic problem is definitely, that's the issue. But again, I think part of what we saw recently with the massive amounts of inflation with the COVID spending and all that stuff, I think in reality, there's a certain amount of debt that you can bear. And then once you get beyond that certain point, like the entire economy of the United States has a certain value, some very big number. And if your debt is less than your value, then, maybe you're okay. But once your debt is so large that it's bigger essentially than what the value of the country is worth, then you start having to deflate your currency essentially. And once you start doing that, then you're just creating mad inflation, and everything costs 10 times as much, and labor costs 10 times as much. Yep. And you can't solve that by layering on more and more levels of government, which layer on more and more levels of debt. You're just adding to the debt, which just means you're adding to the deflation of your currency, which means you're just adding to the dollar cost of everything that exists. So it's like, until you're willing to address those kind of things, until you're willing to get some control of your fiscal house, essentially, then all these ideas about, oh, we're going to do this with this government program, we're going to do this with some other government program, forget it. You're just going to stack on more debt, and whatever you want to give to people is going to be counteracted by the fact that you're going to cause costs to go up with everything that you're giving away. And so once that starts happening, you get in that position, the only choice is you've got to start paring things back, get the value of the country up by being increasingly productive through whatever means. I would say mostly innovation. But then, other things you can add in here and there. Maybe some tariffs are good. Maybe some other taxes are good. Maybe reducing taxes in certain instances is good. If you can spur productivity, with a tax decrease, maybe that's a good thing. But anyway, what it comes down to is it's a very complicated problem. And the platitudes that the two parties spew aren't going to get it done.
Right. And both of them, basically their visions always boil down to, we're going to protect Social Security or not protect Social Security, or we're going to, we're going to support the military even more, or we're going to pare it back. And it's really not focusing on, as a country as a whole, what are we trying to do here? Exactly. What are we trying to achieve, right? What are those 2 or 3 things that we really want, right? And I think if you ask most people, they want, to feel like the economy is working for them, not against them, which is, it does when you start paying for more stuff, or you're paying more taxes, or having to pay off debt or whatever. And, they want their freedoms as much as possible to do that. I mean, but they really don't really build the policies around those 2 or 3 real big goals that most people want. And it's just, a safe place, economy where I can live a decent life, and freedom to do it. It comes down to those 2 or 3 things. And we're putting Band-Aids on things versus trying to solve what the disease is.
Yep. And it's funny. Lynn and I were actually talking about Ben Franklin the other day, which is, tells you something about me and my wife. Right?
All right.
So, but anyway, the thing about Ben Franklin is he was the ultimate pragmatist, right? He only did the things that he thought were necessary for him to do, and if he saw a problem, he tried to do something to fix it. And we were saying that, in terms of the third party that we want to create, I think pragmatism should be like a plank of it. Yeah. Like, we need a party to come out and say, and people just generally be like, okay, we need to seriously ask the question of, what is it that we need versus what is it that we want? Because everybody's got wants. Everybody wants something. I want something. I'm sure you want something. Everybody's got wants. But that's different than actual need. And so it's like, we need to figure out what the needs are, do those things, and then from there, maybe prioritize some of the wants. But what we really do need is, we need an economy in this country that works in conjunction with the rest of the world's economy, because, we're part of the world. And, to get to that point, we need to start looking at needs and stop looking at wants.
Yep. I like that. Well, we probably should wrap this up. We're running over time as it is.
Oh, but,
maybe next week. It did. Well, it's been a crazy couple of weeks, man. But we'll probably take next week off. But maybe one thing that I've thought about, maybe you could come up with, and I'll come up with, and that'll be topic for next show. The 3 to 5 goals, or the ones or the needs that we see as being key for this third party to really push. Because I kind of would like, and then we kind of go back and forth and figure out, what are the ones we kind of agree on, type thing. And the reason why I thought about that is, I do want to start sending messages not that it's going to make any difference in the world, but I would love to send a note to the Senate candidates on all sides, and the representatives on all sides, saying, hey, listen, I'm going to vote for the first candidate that comes along and agrees to at least 3 out of the 5 of these things, and I know most of them will say, well, we can't change campaign finance reform, right? Or whatever, I'm just making that up. but at least start sending the message out there that says these are the goals I think most people, 80% of the people, would agree with.
Yeah.
And if you guys can't come up with pragmatic, to your point, pragmatic ways of accomplishing that, you just don't get my vote.
Yeah.
You know,
No, I'm up for that.
and so be thinking about those, 3 to 5. I'm going to think 3 to 5, how we would word those. Because, maybe that gives us some tangibility too about what we're trying to accomplish with all this, and kind of start the inklings of that third party idea.
Yeah. No, I've been thinking about like if I was actually going to write down my party's platform,
Yeah,
if I ever
that's
had
basically
enough,
what it is.
yeah, ever had enough money to make it, I think basically what I would do, just sort of as a general outline, I would look at whatever the top issues are, because they do surveys about what's most important to you. Just take
Right.
the top 10 and then say, well, this is my policy on this. This is my policy on this. This is my policy on this. And it wouldn't so much be that I would be answering what I think is most important. It would more or less be that here's our answers for what everybody else thinks is important. So I might come at it from that point of view.
Yeah, that's fine.
I've got a million. I've always had bunches of ideas about things. But yeah, so much of it revolves around the idea that if you want to get it done, what's the mechanism to get it done? Like we're saying that we want these things and we know the other parties aren't going to do them. So that's why I hit on for so long the idea that, well, you just got to be something different because the other two parties are not going to respond. It's not in their best interest to respond. They have their captive audiences, right? So it's not in their best interest to even look at other complaints. That's why I think we need something new. But yeah, so no, I think that's a great thing to look at, and I'll definitely
whatever the number is, but we just start kind of formulating that because essence. But even if it doesn't become a third party, even at least in the interim, if you can at least we can clearly articulate, hey, these are the things that are really important to the vast majority of people that I think will agree, and say, if you can't accomplish or work on and be sincere about working on these things, regardless of party, that you're just not going to get our vote. We'll vote for Mickey Mouse or whatever else in the meantime. It's just like that. At least it would be a small step towards trying to figure out how to dig ourselves out of the hole.
Yeah, no, for sure. No, and so 2 weeks we'll be good to go.
Sounds good, man.
All right.
Talk to you a bit.
See you soon.
Bye.